Hi guys, welcome to your week 2 lecture on the close read essay. So really the point of this video is to walk you through the essay assignment sheet. This is going to be your first big essay. It's not due at the end of week 2. It's not due until the middle of the semester, so the end of week 4. You can check the schedule for due dates. The close read essay is 200 points, and really the goal of the essay is for you to analyze something about one of the texts, for you to provide a unique interpretation of that something, and the word something I could even replace with strangeness, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And you're really just trying to come up with something to say about one of the texts that we're reading. And that sounds really, really vague, and that's, I think, good and bad. To preface this, there is no wrong answer. There's no wrong interpretation. I know that I mentioned that in sort of the welcome video that I made when you guys were getting started in the course, but there's really not a wrong answer. You cannot have too wild of an interpretation. You can't have too out there of an interpretation. Now, some literary critics would disagree with me. Some literary critics would say you must take into consideration the historical time frame. You must take into consideration what was going on in the author's life at the time. And sure, all of that might be good ways to interpret a text, perfectly fine ways to interpret a text, things you could certainly do. But I'm not holding texts to such, I guess, boundaries. I think that you can interpret a text however you want, as long as you can provide a logical explanation for your interpretation that is based on the text and the words that you're seeing on the page. That's really what the goal here is, to analyze the words that you're seeing on the page. So what I do in these videos is I read through the assignment sheet as I would if we were in a face-to-face class. I pause, I talk a little bit about what I mean, I might give you some examples of what I mean. This video is going to go through the entire assignment sheet. I'm going to go through a little bit here and there on the rubric, and then I'm going to point you in the right direction of some resources, and I think that that's everything I'm going to do in the video. So if you feel like you don't need to watch this video to understand what the essay is about, or how to interpret the rubric, or where to find those resources in Blackboard in our class, then I'd say you're probably fine to skip the video. But if you're the type of student that really likes everything to be explained 100%, then that's the goal of this video. So I'm going to get started reading through this assignment sheet, and I'll pause and make comments where necessary. So again, your first essay is 20% of your final grade, and that is 200 points. You'll write 2 papers this semester. I quoted myself here, just kind of made this up, I thought it looked good. So what I want to tell everyone is you really should be overanalyzing, and if you feel like you're overanalyzing, then you're on the right track. There is going to be, I think, an obvious interpretation of every single text. But for your close read, I want you to practice digging in to the obscurities of a text and finding the readings that are not as obvious, the ones you have to read a text multiple times in order to get at. So 2 essential goals of this essay. One is I want you to find meaning in even the smallest, most obscure parts of the text. Look at the words. You know, the authors picked specific words for a reason. Now, sometimes they might have just written them down right away and said, yeah, that sounds good. Other times they might have hem-hawed, gone back and forth. Well, should I use home or should I use house? Should I use structure? Should I use building? What is the best word? And in some cases, authors are saying, well, this is the best word, whether that's for form, whether that's for the way that it sounds, or whether that's because one word provides a little bit more different of an underlying meaning or a connotation than another word. So I want you to think about how the text is functioning to give you the interpretation that you're getting, and then pick it apart. It's like you're deconstructing that text. And then, of course, another goal of the essay is when you pick apart the text, to still be able to link together what you're picking apart so that you can formulate a major interpretation about it and say, well, here's what the author's doing by making these choices, and I can see that. Here's my close read. Let me show you what I did to get to this interpretation. A close read essay is kind of like a process analysis where you're walking a reader through your thought process. You know, you read this word and then you read this other word and you realize, well, these two words are really kind of saying something similar that contradicts the initial reading, the initial meaning of the text. So maybe there's something else going on here. All right, so I'm going to read through the prompt. Select one of the texts we have read so far in the course. This can be anything from weeks 1 through 4. So you're currently, ideally, watching this video in week 2. You can choose anything we've already read in week 1, anything you're about to read in week 2, or anything you haven't read yet in weeks 3 and 4. So if there is an upcoming reading that you're really interested in writing about maybe, and this we will get into the Victorian age here, then you can certainly select from it. Ideally, you will keep your close read text, the text that you analyze in your close read, in the boundaries of weeks 1 through 4. However, if you are really, really interested in doing a close read on something that's in weeks 5, 6, 7, or 8, that's okay with me. Let me know that that's what you would like to do. Send me an email because I want to know about it. And then I also just kind of want to, read ahead if I have to, so that I can be on the same page when I'm evaluating your essay. Okay, so pick a text. Obviously, the text I don't want you to pick would be like that introductory chapter content that's like 25 pages. For example, in week 1, it was the introduction to the Romantic period, the one that I provided a lecture for as well. That's not really going to give you anything to do a close read on because we're looking at literature, not necessarily about like anthology chapter content. Okay, so pick a text. Identify something strange about the text that might invite a closer read, that might allow a reader to derive a different meaning from the text than someone who's just reading for pleasure, reading quickly. Again, someone who's just like, yeah, okay, I want to read this poem, I'm just going to read it once, get the general concept, they're going to read through it and say, okay, here's what the poem's about. Tell their friends, go on about their day. Someone who's doing a close read might still have that first initial reading, but then as you're annotating, underlining certain obscurities or inconsistencies or complications with the text, you might say, this is interesting. Wonder why the author chose to do this, chose to pick this word, chose to structure it in this way. That's the strangeness that I'm looking for, that is going to give you that underlying reading that's not the obvious one, the one I want you to get away from. Okay, so focus on this strangeness when you're developing your essay and your thesis statement. The text that you select doesn't have to be obviously strange. It doesn't have to be weird in content. You're just looking for the weirdness within the author's writing choices. So again, that's an inconsistency, maybe a complication that you see with the text. Like, oh, this is complicated, complex. Why did they do this? Something that's ambiguous. Asking that why question. If you feel like you're reading too much into it, then absolutely that's what you should be doing. This is the type of strangeness that I'm looking for. Your close read and interpretation should be effective, unique, asterisk, and interesting. So one of the things I said in your prompt is your close read should be unique. Well, that is always a challenging concept for my students because they say, well, is anything, like, get this really philosophical look. I mean, Miss Osborne, is anything really original? Is there really anything unique out there? And I totally get where you're coming from, so I'm not even sure I know the answer to that question. I'm not even sure if I thought about the answer to that question that I would say you can have an original analysis or a unique analysis. What I mean here is you didn't go to Google to figure out what the text was about and then try to write your paper or your essay into that Googled analysis. Essentially that whole process of saying, I don't know what to write, I'm going to Google some ideas, and then I'm going to pick one, that's plagiarism. So all that I'm asking you to do is just don't even go to Google at all. So that's what unique means to me. Here's another quick example. So if you feel like the poem is obviously about apple picking, that's not your close read, that's not the strangeness that I'm looking for, right? I don't want an essay that says, this poem titled Apple Picking is about apple picking. Maybe, so here's what I want you to consider. Maybe apple picking is a metaphor for something else. Find that something else by identifying areas of the text that might offer a suggestion. So those would be the strangenesses. Is picking fruit from the tree similar to something that Eve did? Is the speaker of the poem relating themselves to someone who might have been in the garden of good and evil? You know, is there some kind of biblical theme happening in the text, right? So that's the strangeness, the weirdness I want you to go to. What I tell my students in my face-to-face class is that you have, hopefully some of you, have a weird part of your brain that you're like, oh, that's too weird for society. It's perfect here. This is, the English studies is where all the weirdos are, and we like that. And if you're like, I'm really just not weird, Miss Osborne, what do I do? That's okay. You just read the text and do your best, and pick a text that you like, and pick a text that you're interested in digging into the strangeness of. And again, I don't mean zombies and vampires and weirdo things. I just mean oddities. Why did the author decide to write it this way? Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the structure here. And in many of my essay prompts, I don't usually hash out exactly what I'm looking for structurally, but I felt as if, well, one, I'm an over-explainer if you can't tell that already, but two, I felt as if giving you a structure for this essay would give you some guidelines, even more so than just saying, here's a prompt, go for it. I want to say, here's a prompt, go for it. So if you don't adhere perfectly to this structure, it's probably okay. But it should have some structure and some semblance of logic behind it. Okay, so in your introduction, if you've taken an English 111 and English 112 class and you have focused on structure, and if you took my English 111 and my English 112 class, you've got this stuff down and you can probably skip this. Alright, so if not, begin with a hook sentence, grab your reader's attention, develop your introduction. I'm on number 2 in the introduction. When you develop that introduction, I want you to do 3 things. Tell me the author, tell me the title of the text. Now, the way that we format titles, you can go into our course in Blackboard, go to the Writing About Literature section, scroll down to where I have Miss Osborne's grammatical notes for writing about literature, and find out about how to format titles in MLA. It's really the difference between should it be in quotation marks or should it be in italics, and I've got some examples here. I would say the majority of, not all, the majority of the works in your textbook are going to be in quotation marks, and if you really want to double check, I format the titles correctly, I think, and if I don't, let me know, but I think I format the titles pretty correctly in our reading schedule, so if you see it in quotation marks on the schedule, then it probably should be in quotation marks when you write it out in your paper. And same is true for italics. So you can find some resources in Blackboard for that, but also elsewhere too. So again, give me the author, give me the title of the text that you're going to do a close read on, and give me a short summary. I mean short, like 1 to 2 sentences, 3 at the max. This is not the place to puff out 3 pages. Let's see. Okay, and then end the introduction with a thesis statement. Your thesis statement is going to be the last sentence of your intro. Don't give me a statement of intention. A statement of intention is something like, this essay will analyze blah blah. That's what you're gonna do. I don't want to know that. I want to know what your interpretation is. What is this main idea of your paper? Not what it's gonna do, but what it is. Does that make sense? Sounds existential. Okay, body paragraphs. make sure that you only cover like one piece of evidence per body paragraph, or I guess one collection of evidence per body paragraph. So for example, let's say I was going to write about how Wordsworth connects the city with captivity and whatever he's saying about that. I'm not really sure yet, but let's say that's my paper. I might have a body paragraph focusing on his captive language, and then I might have another body paragraph focusing on his freedom language, and then I might have another body paragraph connecting those two things and really trying to work on that interpretation. So that's what I mean by either having a piece of evidence per paragraph or a collection of evidences per paragraph, where the collection would be words like captive, bondage, prison, prisoner, things like that. In each of your body paragraphs, start with a topic sentence. Never ever begin with a quote. Don't end with a quote, but I'm going to come back to that. Then give me some context for your first kind of piece of interpretation evidence analysis. Quote the evidence, use an MLA formatted in-text citation. Again, go back to your resources here, because in writing about literature, I have quoting and quoting poetry, and that's going to take you, if you click on it, to the Purdue Owl. It gives you some helpful information here. It talks about long quotations. I'm really not sure I want to see any long quotations in your essays. If you were adamant about it being absolutely necessary, I'd say you're allowed one long quotation in your essay. But I think the more quoting you do, the less close reading you are doing, and then thus the further away from what I'm asking you to do you get. Which translates, what do you care about the most? Maybe, is the worse of a score you get. So avoid quoting too lengthy of a text at a time. Okay. Quote the evidence here is 3. Analyze the evidence. So you can't have quotes and an interpretation and call it a day. You have to show me that process. I'm going to get to that kind of in a little bit when I go through the rubric. So analyze the evidence. The author chose a particular word. The author structured the lines a certain way. The author used a metaphor, a simile. The author made an interesting comparison or contrast, etc. So what? What are you reading into here? Explain it. Give the piece of evidence. Explain how it helps lead you to the interpretation. End on a concluding sentence. Never end on a direct quote. Never end one sentence away from a direct quote. Okay, so what I mean by that is, anytime you quote, try to always have 2 sentences of your own words following that quote. And don't put quotes back to back. That's not effective either. So use this rule for every quote, not just the last one in a paragraph. All right, in your conclusion, I don't have numbers, I have bullets, because you can do this in any order. Restate your thesis and tell me why this matters. Why does the poem, the author, it could be a short story, even doesn't have to be a poem, the idea, why does this close read, whatever it is, why does it matter? Make sure that you have a works cited page. You really are probably only going to have one citation. Again, I don't want you to access any outside sources for this essay. We'll do all that stuff later. We'll get into it in this unit, but you're not going to do it for your essay. So just don't even look at anything else except for the text and what you make of it. And of course, your knowledge of the period. I mean, if you haven't looked at the Romantic Period introduction, or if you haven't watched the Romantic Period introduction lecture video, then you can definitely use that content to help you understand things, but don't go and look at other people's interpretations of a poem. So your works cited page, MLA 8th edition, only one citation, and that's the text from your anthology. If you didn't read it through the anthology, then it'd be wherever you read it through. All right. Here's an example thesis statement, and I'm going to talk about some other options as well, like ones you wouldn't want to do, I guess. While many readers see William Wordsworth's poem We Are Seven as a simple conversation about life after death from the perspective of an adult and child, Wordsworth's poem actually seems to present an economic bias against and criticism of poor, below working class individuals. Okay, so what I'm saying in this thesis statement is most people read this poem and say, oh, here it is. However, I'm doing a close reading and I see this other stuff underneath the surface, that's what I'm going to talk about in this paper. So I want to give you a thesis statement that's kind of like near the C range. So I don't think it's terrible, but it's not going to get you an A or a B on your thesis component of that rubric. And that's something like many readers see Wordsworth's poem We Are Seven as a poem about death, but a close read shows that it is about more than that. The problem with this thesis statement is that it doesn't say what more it's about. It doesn't give you any understanding of where that essay is going. It's way too vague. It's almost a thesis that's like, I don't really know what I'm going to say yet, and I'm not going to come back to this thesis later. Then there is the statement of intention. So I mentioned this previously in the video. A statement of intention is saying something like, this paper will analyze, this essay will be about, blah, blah, blah. In this essay, I will. Don't use I anywhere in your paper, just as a side note. So a D or F style statement of intention is something like, this paper will closely analyze Wordsworth's poem We Are Seven. Great. I already knew that from the minute you mentioned that poem. So this thesis statement doesn't tell me anything that I didn't already know. All right. So I hope that helps. Please feel free to email me your thesis statements at any point. Say, what do you think? Can I get some feedback on it? I'd be happy to do that. Length and format. I want you to write me 3 pages. I want 3 full pages. What is a full page? I know you know the answer to this. So what does Miss Osborne define as a full page? All the way to the bottom. Don't worry about the fact that MLA has those 4 lines in the header. Don't try to overcompensate for that. You don't have to get a line on the 4th page. You certainly can. It's fine. You can go over 3 pages. Also fine. Do not write any more than 5 pages. So if you are on a roll, you got to cut yourself off at some point. 5 pages is the absolute max. I don't want to read more than that. Just because I don't think that, well, I mean, there could certainly be an effective close reading that's more than 5 pages, but for the purposes of this class, let's just stick with 3 to 5. But 2.5 pages is not 3 pages. Yeah, you might be on the 3rd page, but you know what I'm saying when I mean, or you know what I mean when I'm saying 3 full pages. Use MLA 8th edition. If you have taken English 112 at Mitchell and your instructor required the little seagull and you have the 3rd edition of the little seagull, then you have the most up-to-date MLA formatting. However, if you don't, then the Purdue OWL, which is this website here, can help you with MLA format, and it can give you how to cite the text that you're looking at. I think it's in here as well, but the text that you're looking at is an anthology, and MLA format and citation section can give you that information. And then, okay, and there's also like basic stuff in there. All right. Use standard academic grammar and mechanics. Just, try to have a couple proofreads through before you turn it in, please and thank you. Turn it in on Blackboard. You'll turn it in week 4. If you have it ready to go before then and week 4 is not available, just hang on to it until week 4. And if you're worried something crazy is going to happen, then you can always email it to me, but I don't really want you to do that. All right, so here's the rubric. What am I looking at? I'm looking at your formatting. Formatting refers to both your basic page layout and your citation/in-text citations. When you quote, you gotta have in-text citations. Your essay has to have a works cited page. And you guys can read through, all the different criterias. So I'm looking at formatting. I'm looking at your thesis statement. I'm looking at your interpretations. Your interpretations is essentially your overall main big picture analysis of the text, although I don't like to use the word analysis, but that's essentially what it is. Evidence. Evidence is the quoted material, the text base derived straight from the poem, the short story, whatever text you're looking at, the essay that you're looking at in our textbook, or if you're not reading it in our textbook, then wherever you're reading it in. That's the evidence. So a paper that, if you're like, how do I get an A on this paper? You gotta have quotes, you gotta cite the text directly. You don't wanna just remember it and talk about what you remember. You want to be looking at it as you're writing, quote the words, quote the language, look at the language, look at the words, and do that in your paper. You know, show me your thought process in your paper. Analysis is, so if evidence is from the text and the interpretation is sort of like your overall gathering of what the text is about, analysis is how you got there. So this is what I want to talk about for just a couple minutes. So here, no, let me start here. All right, so in the analysis rubric, I say to score an A for these 40 points, your analysis should be logical and should show me each step of that thought process. What I mean here is, again, if your evidence is step A and your interpretation is step G, I want to see step B, C, D, E, F. Like, I want to see every single step in your thought process and get me there. Help me think the way you think. That's the close read goal. Okay. The reason this is the goal is because then I can say, you know what, you thought wrong about this. Now let me argue against you, and that fuels even further scholarship and further literary analysis and further just kind of dealing with texts. That's something we should always be doing, I think. Okay, so how about the B range? You're like, well, I don't know if I can show you every single thing, but I can show you a little bit. I can maybe make the connections. So if your evidence is A and your interpretation is G, you might show me a couple of those steps in the middle, and that's cool. That'll get you like a B score in this portion of the rubric. And then if you showed me like your evidence, you made a comment, that was your analysis, and it led you to this interpretation, that's kind of like that C range. It's basic. You're giving me a little bit of analysis, but not a whole lot for me to really fully understand. Like, for example, I have to make the inferences that you didn't tell me about. So that you can't say too much in this paper. Tell me everything. What that also means, just as like a sidebar to this, is that you don't really have to pick too much from your text in order to write your pages. Students can, that's totally possible, write an entire 3 to 5 page paper on just 4 lines, or maybe even a word, maybe a sentence. A word sounds a bit challenging. All right. What else? Okay, I'm looking at development and structure. So, did you get those 3 pages, and did you not have to fluff a whole bunch of junk just to get to those 3 pages? And is it organized logically? I'm looking at that as well. And that's everything that I'm looking at. All right, what else did I say I was going to do in this? I think I said I was going to point you to some resources. So just as a reminder, there are really helpful sections in the class, well, at least I think that they're helpful, on MLA format and citations, and on writing about literature. So please refer to them. I really do believe that they're going to help you, particularly the very last link in writing about literature. This is going to walk you through that structure even further. And then I provide an example of close reading. I know I've mentioned this in a previous video, but I just want to tell you about it one more time. This would function really well as a body paragraph in your close read paper. So certainly if you're like, Miss Osborne, I want an example. Hey, you got one. You just have to go into Blackboard and find it. Okay. I think that covers everything. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. Send me an email.